ask me to swing by. It's the middle of the night. Is it that you'd like to continue last night? I noticed that you dimmed your lights. First and forward, you tasted. I don't want your body wasted, so I'm putting in that overtime. It's like I found a four-leaf clover. You were sad 'cause you thought it was over. I know my uncle's still part of the show. Don't stop, baby. Come on. I'm gonna show you what love's like in overdrive. You right out of your mind when it's over. Those nosy neighbors who wheels keep turning.
Oh, happy Friday, beautiful people. If you just tuned in, you know it's 9 o'clock and time for Lovebabz, Lovetalk. I'm Babz Rawls-Ivy. So today I'm talking, and I have Susan Yolen from Planned Parenthood Southern New England here.
Hi, Babz.
Hi. I feel like I've had like Susan 2.0 because I had you yesterday and I have you today. How are you?
I'm great. Well, under the circumstances, given the world, the sun is out this morning, and
Yes.
that at least helps.
Yes. So I decided to Planned Parenthood has been coming on periodically to keep us updated on what's going on in the world of women's reproductive rights and reproductive health and legislation accordingly. So as we have been experiencing across the country, seeing these bans and more to follow, I suspect, I thought we would just have a real conversation about what that means, what that looks like, and should we be worried? Now, I want to read you a little excerpt, the rallying call that we got, and I'm a board member on the Planned Parenthood Southern New England. And so it said, if anyone had any doubts before, what we've seen in recent weeks should make it very clear. We are in a state of emergency for women's health in America. This is no longer something that can be ignored. It's not a problem that anyone can simply hope will get better. It's an emergency and a nationwide crisis, and we need to respond in kind. We are in it now. Like there's no wishing, hoping, no, they won't, no, they won't. We are in it.
And it feels real coordinated, doesn't it? I mean, when you just see these dominoes falling, these states, one after the other, adopting laws that are almost identical, seemingly based on some model bill that someone created or thought was the best path to a Supreme Court ruling. And they're all, about fetal heartbeats very, very early in pregnancy, so early that most women wouldn't even necessarily know they were yet pregnant. And, severe penalties that vary some, but mostly severe penalties for providers. So it's those two things that seem the most egregious, but it's state after state after state. And to your comment about the board, being on the board, I mean, I just was looking at photos this morning from the St. Louis Post-Dispatch of activists and board members from Planned Parenthood in St. Louis.
Because they have one clinic that does abortions.
The last remaining of any provider, but Planned Parenthood's last clinic it's in downtown St. Louis. I've been there. It's a beautiful health center. And that one, they are probably going to be deprived of their license by the state health department today. So that means that the state of Missouri will have no abortion provider in the state.
And so what will women be forced to do?
Well, imagine, you know, if you have the resources, travel to the next nearby
state. And poor
state.
women don't.
And poor women don't. And moreover, you know, some other states do have things like mandatory waiting periods and other barriers that if you somehow figured out a way of getting to another state and took time off from work or put your kids in the hands of your family to take care of while you were gone or whatever you had to do, you might have to stay there for 48 hours and wait for the time period to elapse.
Wow.
So even things like that go into like the traveling part are big, serious challenges for folks who don't have support, money, etc. And then, of course, there's the idea that we, God forbid, go back to the old days where people come up with homemade
desperation.
remedies.
When you stand on the corner of desperation and no opportunity, you will do desperate things.
And women did.
Yes. So talk a little bit. Let's go back a little bit. How long have you been with Planned Parenthood?
Since 1987, Babz.
So you've seen it. Did you ever think we'd come to this day?
No. And I'm, you know, ready to retire shortly. And to the idea that here, you know, my career is culminating at such an unfortunate and desperate time feels, you know, it doesn't feel good.
Because you're like the legislative guru around these matters.
Well, I've seen a lot in my day. I mean, including, you know, in fact, it's funny because the Webster versus Reproductive Health Services Supreme Court ruling in '89 was based on a center, not a Planned Parenthood, but another provider in St. Louis that was fighting back against some restrictions on public financing of abortion at the time, which seemed terrible, but compared to today, not so extreme. But you know, that is what triggered here in Connecticut a fierce reaction amongst all of us advocates that we should put Roe versus Wade, codify the protection of legal abortion in our state laws, just in case. And
so how did we have the wherewithal to do that and other states didn't?
Good question. You know, I mean, I always say that there was an alignment of the moon and the stars back in 1990 that sort of worked in our favor. I think we were one of the first states to try doing it. I think we had honestly, there were pro-choice coalitions that sprung up all over the state. People were up in arms. We had a rally one Sunday afternoon in Hartford in a sleet storm. And 3,000 people showed up in a sleet storm in February of 1990. So it was, I don't know. I guess that was the first moment when people thought Roe might go. You know, it might fall. And here we are, you know, 30 plus years later, and it took all that time.
I mean, and I think we have to look at too. It's a legislative assault, right? Like you have to get legislators on board to sort of say this is what's going to happen, and then you have to have judges who sort of back that up.
Yes, right.
Which is scary, and now we're starting to see how important it is who serves on what bench and where.
Absolutely. And now, of course, you know, back then we were actually I got involved in this movement because Reagan was running for president, and the rallying cry from our side was, oh my God, he'll pack the Supreme Court and overturn Roe. And I don't think he was passionate about abortion rights or taking them away, but neither is Trump. It's all just theater, right? To please it's raw meat to his base.
Yeah.
So we were all concerned back then about the Supreme Court and then, you know, the federal courts that lead up to the appeals courts, the district courts that lead up to the Supreme Court rulings that sometimes have worked in our favor. I mean, honestly, as recently as the summer of 2016, so 3 years ago, the whole women's health ruling, the Supreme Court actually said that Texas really shouldn't and couldn't put onerous restrictions on abortion providers. And we were all relieved. And then the
So what are the areas that are of most concern to us at the moment? Missouri?
Well, but I was counting yesterday. I think it's 10 states. Ohio, Kentucky, Louisiana, Alabama, which is,
which is the poorest
infamous
state in the country.
Probably. Georgia, where, of course, the film industry apparently has a huge
yes,
business interest.
People have started to say they're going to pull production.
Mm-hmm.
But the other thing is, some of the state's attorneys have said, even if this pass, even whatever, we're not going to prosecute or go after these cases. These are Black women prosecutors.
Yes, I've seen them.
U.S. attorneys.
Yes.
And they're like, wait, whatever. We're not going to bring any of these cases forward.
Right. And so then you start wondering, what does the rule of law even mean?
Yes.
I respect that position. I'm glad they're saying that. But, everybody's got their job in this system. And right now, nobody's doing the right thing. Starting up at the White House. Everybody's, flaunting the rules of law. And I don't know, is that where it all turns out? Everybody just decides what they want to do. In this case, yes, good. But,
yes. And this whole idea of, even if you go somewhere else to have this performed, have this medical procedure done, you could still face some consequences.
Right. That there are travel bans.
How do you get that?
How would you even enforce that?
I don't
right?
even.
Cops sit on the border, and whenever there's a woman in a car, they pull them over.
They pull them over and just assume.
We used to. I don't want to say deride, but there were countries in Eastern Europe, Romania being one of them, where we knew back in the 80s that women had to get monthly checkups to make sure that they were menstruating. Because if they weren't and they were pregnant, something had, I forget what, frankly, Romania may have had a mandatory abortion policy or a mandatory pregnancy policy. I forget, but it was this intrusive policy that women couldn't be left alone to decide whether or not to have a child or a.
Is this starting to feel like that? This is starting to feel like that. It kind of is,
yes.
Yeah.
Yes.
I think it's starting to feel like that.
And this idea, the other thing we've fought off over the years, and it hasn't come up lately, but it could, is for younger folks. And again, I always want to say that teenagers are not the main users of the service called abortion. It is mostly women between the ages of 20 and 30. Mm-hmm. So if people think that it's teenagers, that's...
And is it overwhelmingly white women?
No, it isn't. It's women of all religions, of all races, I would say. In fact, in some cases, it's women who have less access to good, affordable contraceptives that end up pregnant unintentionally. So no, I wouldn't say it's overwhelmingly white. It's probably equally balanced among the races. But anyway, I lost my train of thought. Anyway,
so we're seeing these bans, and the Planned Parenthood Federation itself is leading this charge, or leading the charge. Protesting. Yes. And we were talking on the elevator coming up. You saw the Missouri people getting arrested, the board members.
Yes.
We're happily getting arrested because they are trying to see this governor.
Shame the governor.
Yeah. And so how long do you think they could keep this up?
I don't know. And, the other thing I will just add to all of this state by state, assault is the assault that's coming from Washington, D.C. through the rules and regulations that the Department of Health and Human Services is promulgating, banning abortion providers from getting the National Family Planning Program called Title X, new rules that would allow religious, I'm putting air quotes around the word religious, but anybody who's an employer that doesn't want to offer services to someone, for example, who is transgender, like Hobby Lobby, so that basically anybody can refuse to provide services, even if you're, say, the receptionist at a hospital. You can say, well, I won't answer the phone because you do abortion here. So there's all of that happening. And I would say to your question about PPFA leading the charge, yes, and the Center for Reproductive Rights and the ACLU. And I saw a commercial maybe yesterday, with the actress Busy Phillips,
Yes.
who said, I've had an abortion.
Yes.
And it's time for all of us to stand behind these groups that are going to have to raise millions of dollars to go into protracted legal fights in federal court all over the country to protect our rights. And so it's all of us together, I would say, who are going to have to incur the cost of what does it mean to protect ourselves against in court against all of these attacks.
So what is the responsibility of men in this? Are men with us? Are there some men with us? I mean, I know we have men on our board, but
yes,
I'm just like, because this plays out always as the woman's issue.
Yep,
but women don't get pregnant alone.
No kidding.
It requires another part.
Yes. Well, I mean, I think there are great men involved in this fight. There are good men in elected office. I mean, we've had people like Dick Blumenthal, who, has spent his career, frankly, fighting for women's reproductive health and rights, and other folks. Our new Attorney General, William Tong, here in Connecticut, is a great example. He is, I mean, honestly, I saw him a few weeks ago, and he said he really didn't realize how much time he would have to devote to these issues as Attorney General, just because it's become such a overwhelming. Connecticut, the state, has joined a lot of these lawsuits and signed on to litigation in various places to protect Planned Parenthood and our rights. So I do think there are some great men, at least in positions of power. In terms of the grassroots movement, yeah, men need to, I think, or should, or continue to step up their support for all of us who are fighting this and will get pregnant. And I will say this, sitting over there on Whitney Avenue, where we have protesters all the time, as you know, I'm sure most New Haveners have seen them. It's a lot of old male protesters who just, will never become pregnant, ever.
Probably won't get anybody pregnant.
Probably won't. It's a sad commentary.
But this has gripped the country, and I find it a lot disheartening when I see women at the top of the list of pushing for these bans.
Yep.
I don't understand it at all, because what they're essentially saying is, I'm not for my best interest. At least that's how I hear it when I see them.
True, and we have seen people who purport to disagree with the notion of legal abortion, and yet when it becomes necessary for them, they can excuse themselves or their daughter and say, well, that's different. We're in a different situation. It's okay for us. I mean, I know that sounds crazy, but it happens all the time.
I know. Listen, we've seen it. Some of it has come out with some of these men who had mistresses and what have you, and it has come out that they've said, you know what, you have to go get this handled, but they're the leaders of supporting these bans. Like, do you see what you're doing? Like,
It's funny. Just yesterday, I saw posted on Facebook an article about a evangelical minister named Robert Schrenk. It's a name like that. Who spent his career protesting abortion vehemently. I mean, or getting arrested. He's the man. If you ever heard the anecdote about someone running up to Bill Clinton at the Democratic National Convention and shoving a fetus in a jar in his face, that's the guy. And now he has apparently had an epiphany and believes that actually he's now ministered to enough folks who haven't got enough resources to have children and have a healthy family and life, that now he's realized the error of his ways and supports legal abortion.
Really?
Which is always,
I guess better late than never.
Well, seriously.
But you've done a lot of damage in between.
Yes. You harmed a lot of people and shamed a lot of people.
Yes.
I mean, I think a lot of what the problem, too, is this stigma that persists around abortion, and that those of us who've had abortions don't talk openly about it. And
Mm-hmm.
I do think I respect Busy Phillips. I don't know much about her, but I know she's a young actress, and I respect people who feel like it's time to start saying, this has been a procedure I've needed.
Yeah.
And that we are, we've sort of hidden behind I will say the movement has also allowed us to say to patients, it's private, you don't have to tell anybody. And I respect that too, but I also think it's time for folks to not pretend that they're alone, because at least 1 in 4, if not 1 in 3 women in America will have an abortion in her
Yeah.
life.
I mean, I think to your point, people have to see that the women that are having these procedures are your neighbors and your mothers and your sisters. They're not some, I don't know what you think, party girl out there who had a good time and don't want to take responsibility. That's not it. Or it could be it, so what? But there is it's such a broad spectrum of reasons that people ought to see it, so that they can stop with this ridiculous story that they're telling themselves about why this is happening.
Absolutely. In Rhode Island, where, as you know, we have a large.
Thanks, Harry, for pulling it up. Evangelical minister Rob Schneck. Yes, Harry pulled it up on the screen for me.
Good. Oh, good.
Once militantly anti-abortion, evangelical minister now lives with regret.
Yep.
Okay.
Ooh, right. Anyway, I was just going to say, in Rhode Island, so I may have mentioned this in past interviews, but, there they are. It's sort of the mirror image of Connecticut, although smaller. And we share a border, and they've never codified Roe in all these years.
And it was a hard fight this time.
We're still fighting it. It isn't finished. We are hoping for a Senate vote. The Rhode Island House voted a month or two ago to codify legal abortion in Rhode Island for the first time in all these years, and the Senate Judiciary Committee actually rejected the bill, and so we're taking another swing at it, and we hope I'm knocking on wood as I say this, that the committee will think differently. There's been some changes to the legislation, and we're hoping to get through the Rhode Island Senate, and that will be, in one, hopeful note in all of this, that a state, and let's not forget, New York just codified.
Yes.
And several other states, and then there are those of us that have already got those protections on the books. So, there is a bulwark of states, mostly on the coast, the sort of what you'd call blue states, I guess. But, Rhode Island's interesting and different because it's a blue state, but it's a lot of Catholicism that pervades the,
I was just going to ask you,
there.
like, what is at the root of that? Because if they mirror us, they're on the border and they're coastal just like we are, and got progressive folks. Like, what's the problem? But you just said
it's a very powerful arm of the church, I would say, mostly.
And they don't have no other issues to worry about but this.
Yeah, serious.
I'm just
saying.
Anyway,
we're still hoping that by the end of their legislative session sometime in June, that there will be protections in place in Rhode Island too.
So, Susan, talk a little bit about what it requires to sort of lobby this hard for this, because the Rhode Island piece, since I've been a board member, has been a much talked about fight to the. We're and I hear this is the closest it's ever been.
Yes. Well, there's no easy way of doing something like this, and a parallel maybe here in our state is the fight for paid family medical leave that we've been part of, led by some other groups, including Quelf here in Connecticut, for 5 or 6 years. And it's just, it's taken all that time. We're still hopeful that it will pass this session, but honestly, it's a push. And same in Rhode Island. Here's, a challenging issue, educating legislators, and frankly, every 2 years, ramping up our election work in both states, or endorsing good candidates who agree with us and helping them get elected, so that we're starting to change the face. At least in Rhode Island, I will say that we and others have started to change the face of the General Assembly. There are lots more women are now sitting in the State House in Rhode Island, and that's really helping. So, I mean, it's this sort of double thing where you're on off sessions, you're electing people, and then once they're elected, you're lobbying them and holding them accountable, making them sponsor bills, and then the hard work of tweaking the language and closing the door with some leaders and sort of hammering out the details, which our folks up there have been doing.
So, talk a little bit, Susan, about the education of legislators. Because just as you are pressing to educate them about what this really means, there's a group of folks who are like, no, this is what this, you see the pictures, you hear the stories, whatever. And I can see people trapped in the middle of like, I don't understand any of this. It sounds like whatever. How do you press the truth in front of these legislators with this other force that's like playing the moral card or whatever the moral card is?
Interesting question. And I'll give you an example that in Connecticut this session, there's a bill that would require these fake clinics called crisis pregnancy centers to stop or erroneously advertising what they do and misleading people, especially in online, advertising and stuff, that they are actually going to give you truthful, unbiased information that will include information and referrals for abortion when they, in fact, won't. And there was an effort. The bill has only gotten through one chamber so far. And there have been amendments to require Planned Parenthood and legitimate family planning providers to be subject to the same restriction. And so, to your point, there's sort of this belief that we're just both two ends of the continuum of a bunch of crazy abortion obsessed groups, one end against and one end for. Mm-hmm. When what we have been trying to say is, no. We are licensed outpatient clinical providers. We have medical protocols, medical staff at every health center, including physicians, advanced practice nurses, midwives, whoever may be on hand at a particular center, and that we are rigorously inspected every few years by the state health department and relicensed and so forth. I mean, this is health care.
Yes.
It's not ideology.
Yes.
So to your question, I mean, educating legislators, I think the best thing, if we can get them to do it, and they all seem very busy all the time, but is bring them into a health center and take them through. Mm-hmm. And once they see that it's actually probably nicer than their own doctor's office, clean, professional.
Yes.
We use electronic medical records. We bill insurance companies and the State Department of Social Services for Medicaid. We are legitimate health care, and
yes.
And our opponents aren't. And I think sometimes that the debate kind of gets us swept up in because we're advocates. And I will say there aren't that many healthcare providers that engage in as much advocacy as we do. Mm-hmm. So
yes, because I don't know if Yale Corporate Hospital was out on the front lines talking about this, and they are a respected healthcare provider,
right? And they offer abortions,
by the way. but nobody's over there. No one's over there protesting,
right? Well, and by the way, there are rules being promulgated in Washington that might impact them because they do receive federal funding. I'm sure in many different ways that I'm not aware of, but I'm sure research grants, not to mention, mm-hmm. Medicaid reimbursements and so forth, and probably other support. And that could, impact them if they continue to provide abortion. And, I would not be surprised if, the federal government started to drill down and say, that this is not acceptable if you want to continue getting federal money. So all we can do is hope that the Trump era.
But if they do that, then hospitals would have to pick up and join the cause.
Well, one would hope, They would, that they wouldn't just say, well, we don't need to do, I mean, honestly, the state regulations on abortion don't allow freestanding providers like Planned Parenthood to offer procedures in the third trimester, which are extremely rare, but often medically necessary.
Yes, because the doctor comes back and says,
you're not going to have a healthy baby, or a baby that will survive.
And I've had members in my family who have went through that. You know, there was a chromosome issue.
Yes.
And they were like, listen, this is not gonna, there's no chance of any kind of, you know, and so the pregnancy had to be terminated, and thank God.
Yes. And that's usually not found out until at least after 20 weeks, sometimes 21, 22 weeks, which often puts it into a place where it needs to be done in a hospital.
Yeah. Yeah.
So hospitals are an important part of the continuum of care, and they need to be able to continue to offer abortions.
Mm-hmm. I think that's a good point that you made, that to put out there that Planned Parenthood is a medical healthcare provider. Is a healthcare provider.
Yes.
I mean, there's a lot of things that happen when people go to Planned Parenthood.
Right. Well, and we're doing, pap smears and breast exams and colposcopies if your pap smear is irregular and so forth. So people, the abortion issue is important to us.
Yes.
Of course. But there's all the rest of the healthcare. We're doing HIV testing and so forth. So, and we're also, just FYI, we have a wonderful clinical research program where we offer patients the opportunity to participate in a research study that might, in fact, help the world get a better pap smear or a faster HIV test or some other important contribution to
the work that we do
healthcare.
with young people, I think, is important.
Yes.
I don't know who is talking to young people about sex and possibilities and all those kinds of things. I don't know who's doing that better than Planned Parenthood.
Well, the trouble is that schools aren't doing it.
That's my point. Like, schools are not doing it, and kids are misinformed, and when they're misinformed, they make bad decisions.
Yeah. Well, especially when there's so much bad info out there online.
Yes.
It used to be that we'd say, well, kids pick it up in the schoolyard. Well, now they pick it up
on the internet.
Their phone.
Yes.
And it isn't always right.
Yes. Yes.
But the other piece is that parents aren't doing much of a job. They are doing no better job talking to their kids about sex than
their parents did. Yes.
Yeah. So
yes,
that's also, there's lots of room for improvement there. And we try to do some of that work when we can, to talk to parents and help them identify some strategies for bringing up that conversation so that it's not just that one talk that we that people think is all you need to do to get your kids ready for adulthood.
The birds and the bees.
Yeah, the birds and the bees.
Oh my God.
Yeah.
So what gives you pause at this moment in time?
Pause?
Yes. What this is playing out in front of you as you are about to retire and move in a different direction.
Yep.
What do you think about?
I guess, and it's all bound up to me about with so much of what else is going on in Washington, the painful situation there. And it's not, this is one issue that's being, highlighted. But when you think about the border and the family separation and, there's just, it's almost overwhelming. And I just think I hope we who care about human dignity and the future of the planet, global warming, it gives me pause.
I know. What did the scientist guy said? We think we're like years away. No, we're like 10 or 15 years away from. And I was like, wait, what?
I know. My daughter had a baby 2.5 weeks ago, and
what world is she going to inherit?
What world is she going to live in? Is she going to be too hot? Is she going to have enough water? And she's a little girl living in a privileged world in California. She's not a child hungry in a sub-Saharan country, but those kids are already suffering. So I don't know. I guess it's all there's a stew of sad and incredibly pressing issues that we have to, and the more we think about Trump every day, right? Mm-hmm. He's like the accident we can't stop looking at. the car crash.
Yes.
We're not thinking about global warming and other things. So I feel like we've got to, we who care about, I'm putting on my Planned Parenthood Votes hat right now and saying, we who care about the future of our kids need to organize and knock on some doors this, fall of 2020.
Now, do you think you'll I mean, I know you want to go and wrap your arms around the new grandbaby, but this work is work, right?
Yeah, yeah. I know I'll be doing doors in 2020. I've done it many times and gone to other states, and I'm thinking about Maine.
Or what's going on in Maine?
Well, they just have, some important elections coming up, and it's the Susan Collins Senate reelection. So I'm not quite sure how that's going to play itself out, but I know there will be a lot of people watching that one. And, which is not to say we should take Connecticut for granted, because I always say this, it's almost like 50 some years since Griswold versus Connecticut, the Supreme Court ruling that legalized birth control. And we kind of take pride in that because it was Planned Parenthood's case, but it was really a badge of shame. I mean, this was a state where the General Assembly would not legalize birth control after many states had done so. And women from Connecticut had to drive to Westchester County just to get a diaphragm or the pill, which was brand new back then.
And that's just 50 years ago.
That's just 50 years ago.
Like
in my lifetime.
That's like 1960s.
It was the 60s. The ruling was 65. The arrests were here on Orange Street in 1961.
Wow.
So that's too recently for us to take any pride.
I was going to say, we can't be really like rah, look at us.
Right.
We look, look at us 50 years out.
Yeah.
I mean, this was just birth control.
Birth control. And the ruling, Griswold versus Connecticut, was about married people, and that the privacy right, which they defined in that ruling for the first time, should surround, they called it a penumbra, like a shadow of privacy around basically a husband and wife. It was not a ruling that said anyone who's a consenting partner, adult or not, could access birth control. So even that ruling had its limits.
Wow. Ooh, I can't even imagine.
I know.
So if you were a poor woman, what did you do?
So what happened?
Tried to count the calendar? I don't know.
What happened though was that Congress, which was a very different place back then, and Republicans actually believed in birth control. They created Title X, the National Family Planning Program, because they said, well, if you're a woman who can afford birth control, that's all well and good, but what about those women who can't? Let's create a program. It was under Nixon, Babz.
Whoa!
It was under Nixon. It was
God.
George H.W. Bush was a original sponsor of the bill.
That's crazy.
Republicans were, they had their own weird motives sometimes, I will admit. But nevertheless, they created a program that exists to this day and now is in crisis.
Somebody needs to remind them. Like,
I know.
You know what happened under Nixon? You know what happened under... Y'all did this. And now you want to undo this good work? Like, what is happening here?
Especially under the leadership of someone like President Trump, who doesn't really care. He couldn't care less. It's just if it pleases his
less
base.
About women.
Right. Not right.
Like women.
If he was now Mike Pence, different story.
Oh, but he
is an ideologically driven person who has
scary.
Been working on this for years. Right. This is the
man
goal.
who won't have meetings alone with women.
Exactly. Right.
Like, you're a grown married man. What are you talking about?
Right.
You won't have meetings with women.
I guess he's afraid of his own impulses. Who knows? I don't think he need be afraid that women will prey on him, but that's just me speaking.
Oh my God, the thought. But I think he's a dangerous animal too.
Yes. Well, I think a lot of the policies that we've just been talking about, the Health and Human Services rules and so forth, are born of his beliefs.
Yeah.
I mean, they're very in the weeds policies and what they call guidance, and they would not have been something that the White House presently would have cooked up. They are. Yeah. He has come up with people who have written and are trying to implement them. And they've replaced the people who govern. It's so ironic, but it's not the first time, who govern the family planning program. The bureaucrats in HHS who run it are now all people who don't believe in birth control. So the people running the National Family Planning Program are opponents
of
birth control.
So let's dismantle it from the inside.
Yeah, yes.
Let's make it not work.
Right. Yes. Right.
So, oh my gosh.
I know.
So,
it's very devious.
It is. And I think on a couple of fronts we have to illuminate that and share with the public that this is what is happening.
Yep.
Because they are out there with their message of, this is a great day for women. We are banning abortions. Okay, but no, you're not doing that. What you're saying is women can't decide what's in their best interest.
And what's underneath all of this is control.
Yeah.
Putting women back in the 50s where, this isn't the 50s.
No.
People can't afford to have in a 2-parent household or any household someone who cannot somehow sustain and work and bring resources into the home and the family. So, this is not that world anymore.
Mm-hmm.
The post-World War II, moms at home and dads
Oh,
out,
my God.
and the GI Bill and, buying that little house in suburbia. That's just not the world we're living in.
No. And I don't know how much of that was really true, as much as it was just given, it was painted. And people were just like, oh, I like that and I want that. But that really wasn't sustainable.
Well, and there was a little, in some quarters, there was a little shame about having a wife who worked,
Yes.
Like, no wife of mine will work.
And, honestly, Susan, there's still some of that underlying culture somewhere. I hear whispers of it, that there's some pride in men who could sort of, quote unquote, sit their wives down.
Yep.
Like that's still a measure of prosperity and success when you can do that.
Right. Which has nothing to do with the fact that women actually enjoy working.
I know. And have ability and are able
have
to
a
contribute.
Contribution to make to the world, and not just a financial contribution to your family, but oftentimes some satisfaction and personal growth and out of their
because
some meaning, some actual life meaning.
Because women are humans.
Yes.
FYI.
Yes.
People didn't know
beyond our childbearing.
Yes.
Way beyond.
Beyond. Like that's not the end all or be all of womanhood.
Right.
It can't be, because there's a lot of women who are not bearing children, who are women and are quite successful and are fulfilled and not miserable and not unhappy.
Absolutely.
More
so than ever.
Yes. So tell me what you're hopeful for, because now you've got this new granddaughter. What are you hopeful for?
Good question. Well, I am hopeful because there is a generation of activists coming up, and they see the world through different glasses. I'm looking at your wonderful eyeglasses. They see the world differently. They see the world more expansively. I'm sure we've talked about intersectionality here, but they see these issues of reproductive health and rights connected to immigrant rights and LGBT rights and Black Lives Matter and the whole panoply of things and the environment and sustainable neighborhoods and toxins and
equity and
yes, and it's not just reproductive health and rights in a sort of narrow band. And so I think the intersectionality, the connections, the collaboration on important issues that will impact everybody is what I'm hopeful about. And I know I'm retiring with some great colleagues on my team and at Planned Parenthood who care about all of this as well. And I think, as you mentioned before, we're doing as much work as we can, sort of training young folks to either be spokespeople, peer educators.
I love that peer educator piece.
Campus organizers.
I think that's so critical.
Yes.
Young people armed with real information,
right,
and are willing to sort of share it. Willing to go out there and say to their peers, "This is the truth. This is the science. This is the." I think that's powerful.
Yeah, with a condom in their pocket sometimes, you know.
Yeah.
But yes. And to bring them back to the health center. You know, we have these teen clinics once a month or so where, you know, we just order up the pizza and, you know, kids come on their own voluntarily, and then they can have a visit at the health center while they're there and talk to kids and have some education while they're doing all of that. So that's great. But I have great hope that we're in good hands going forward.
You feel that way, really?
I do, yes.
Okay.
And I do think the world is so different that it needs different hands.
Oh, okay.
It's time for a change. It's time for new thinking. And, you know, they'll have their hands full, but I am hopeful.
Okay.
I have to be.
I like that. I'm glad you're hopeful. Because if you weren't hopeful, I'm like, damn it.
I know.
What are we going to be?
I know. And we all have to go. And, you know, I mean, also seize the day and go to Paris and Barcelona and nurture ourselves a little bit too.
Yes, because you know what? You gotta replenish. And you know, you've got to enjoy life too.
Yes, we only go around once.
We only go around once, and the fight will continue.
Right.
You know, and there'll be others who can raise the sword and ring the bells. And, you know, every now and again, you got to step away and say, oh, I'd like to go.
A breath of fresh air.
Oh, yeah, I'd like to walk the Champs-Élysées and take it in.
Look up at the Eiffel Tower.
Look up at the Eiffel Tower.
Yes.
Drink champagne.
So you and I are both going to go back at some time in our
lives. Let's make that a reality.
Yeah.
Seriously, I love that city.
Yeah,
that's my city. So thank you, Susan.
Oh, Babz, thanks so much.
I so appreciate having you on the times that you've been.
Well,
I've enjoyed
been really
this.
Fun.
It's been fun. I've enjoyed it immensely, and the people have enjoyed it. And it is a great way to sort of put real information out there for people.
Well, New Haven's a great city, and I think folks here understand what we're talking about.
Yes, and thank you for your service. I mean, you are highly regarded everywhere.
Thank you.
Susan Yolen, you are a legend. So thank you so much for your service and your time. And, you know, I'll see you around.
Well, yeah, I'll come back and talk about my grandchildren.
Yes, we love that. I can't wait to hear. Thank you, Harry. And thank you to the listeners for today. Lovebabz, Lovetalk. This is the 9 o'clock show. And Susan Yolen from Planned Parenthood, Southern New England, was the guest today. I'll see y'all.